Hello and welcome to the EPRI Current. I'm your host, Samantha Gilman, and today we'll be taking a look back at 2024 and the episodes we recorded, the guests we had, and some of the highlights from those episodes. 2024 was a big year for the EPRI Current. We had 29 episodes with 59 guests and more than 10,000 downloads. So thank you to our listeners who continue to come back and learn from EPRI on the work that we're doing and what the industry is talking about as a whole. So we're going to listen to a few segments today from a few of our top episodes, including some clips from Ambition into Action, which was the special series we had on the Global Forum for Nuclear Innovation. We're going to hear a bit about AI and cybersecurity, the practical realities of the energy transition, and an episode from the Gulf. Not only did we have a diverse group of topics and guests in 2024, but we also hosted episodes from around the world. So with no further ado, here we go.
When we talked about applications for nuclear beyond electricity, we heard from people around the world about ways they were conceiving of new reactors to fulfill these different purposes, redesigning things from the ground up with a completely different application in mind. And I thought that was pretty fascinating because I'm interested in these reactor designs myself as a matter of background and my day job. So that was particularly interesting. The third podcast we had talked about the ways you can improve efficiency, how you can operate a lean machine. And when I had first thought about this, it was all about technology. But when I started talking to people who actually work both in industry and who work on, leading small teams of boat racing, the realization that efficiency is not so much about the tools you have access to, but about the way you take advantage of people's knowledge and skills to apply any tools you have access to was a really interesting perspective change for me that I hadn't considered.
John, did you look at how maybe power sector investments may change because of this bill, or particularly maybe with the investment in and deployment of emerging technologies? And then two, wondering about maybe looking at, for us, for consumers, how is this going to, or how did your model show how this could impact household energy bills?
Yeah, excellent questions. And I would say that despite the differences in the models, I think one theme across the 11 models that participated in the study is that IRA may be a really large influence on power system investments and on emissions over time. And so one of the things we see IRA doing is amplifying this trend we've seen in recent years of increasing wind, solar, and energy storage deployment. I think across the models, we see something like 2 to 4 times increase relative to a case without IRA incentives. And that's much larger than even historically the single largest wind and solar deployment years. That's almost each and every year on average between now and 2035. There are some differences across models in how quickly you might see some of those changes. And that reflects the fact that many of these near-term bottlenecks, whether that's ramping up supply chains or navigating the interconnection queue process, or even thinking about financing and interest rates, there is differences across models in terms of how quickly those dynamics might change. But in addition to wind, solar, and storage deployment, we also see IRA impacting existing nuclear. There are credits for keeping those units online. So we see more nuclear over time. It's existing. But we also see some CCS addition for coal and gas plants. There's a lot more variation across models, given the uncertainties about ramping up those emerging technologies. But I would say that that's something that many of the models that are participating in the study saw.
And CCS is carbon capture?
That's right, carbon capture and storage. And that can be retrofits of existing plants, or it could be new plants with CCS. But there's, these incentives within IRA are not just for the power sector. There's also carbon capture and storage incentives that could apply for direct air capture, basically pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere, as well as carbon capture for industry and for fuels. We do see some models that deploy CCS for those non-power applications.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say, John, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, that across all the models, the bulk of the emissions reductions that we expect to see over the next decade or so, kind of the first decade of impact from the law, come from accelerating a couple of trends that are sort of already underway, but get supercharged by the law. And that's the growth of wind and solar power, which also accelerates the retirement and reduction of coal-fired generation in the power sector, and the growth of electric vehicles, which help us reduce the reliance on petroleum-based transportation fuels. And of course, the cleaner the grid mix gets, the more beneficial that transition to EVs also is from an emissions perspective.
Could you talk a little bit more about the need for entire energy economies to support these emerging resources?
Yeah. So, I mean, just think about the electric system today. It did not get built in a day, obviously, but not even in a decade, right? It has been a century of building, right? We have hydro assets on the electric system today that have been operating for 100 years, right? This system has taken many, many, many decades in order to build. And that's because it's not just building one thing. It is building an entire ecosystem and infrastructure that connects all of it. And so when we look at, we do a lot of work in the modeling space, and we've recently completed a net zero analysis that says, okay, for the U.S. economy, what will it potentially take to achieve net zero? And so what we see is somewhere between 2 to 5 times the capacity that we have on the system today, based on different scenarios, or kind of bounding scenarios of what that can look like. The infrastructure needed to do that is huge. Now, you think about new fuels. Well, new fuels need to be moved, probably in pipelines, right? And if they're different chemical makeup, they may need different piping. They may need new piping, right? So all of this infrastructure to move energy around has to be invested in and built. And so that has impacts on communities. That has potentially, right? Because we have to understand where we are building it. We have to engage with the communities that are there in order to make these decisions and move these things forward. So, you know, we tend to talk about the technology piece of it, and that is so, so important because we know technology takes decades, but infrastructure and scale also takes decades. And decades plus decades is just more decades, which means we have to be realistic about the time it's going to take to see this transition happen.
So we have a challenge right now in just getting the timing to match and meet the needs of consumers and fleet operators, for example, that have a much shorter procurement time for the vehicles. And that's why we have to start the grid conversations even earlier, because it can take a little bit longer on the grid. So we have to just figure out this timing mismatch and get everyone to working together, which is the beauty of EVs to Scale 2030. It's about collaborating and getting this information on the same page and getting all the players in the same place. I would add to that, there are 290 or so million cars, buses, and trucks on the road. And that could literally mean that EV charging might be needed anywhere. Challenge, also an opportunity. So we just have to, think about what that means. But that is something that's worth mentioning. And then maybe I'd mention that there are over 3,000 utilities in the country. And you can see where this adds complexity because every utility is pretty much local or regional. They have different processes. And so we, imagine a fleet operator trying to deal nationally or nationwide getting a fleet ready. And they've got different utilities with different programs and different ways to procure power and sign up for power needs and so on. So these are things that are really challenges. And then maybe the last thing is just waiting too long to get to your utility and start that conversation because you're thinking so much about the truck or the car or the bus. And then you think, oh, now I've got the trucks coming. Let me go now talk to the utility. And in many ways, this almost needs to be a little bit, well, certainly at the same time, but maybe even reversed. You got to get this on the radar of the utilities early.
So speaking of, and talk about complex, Diego, Britta mentioned there are more than 3,000 utilities. What has utility outreach look like for your fleet customers? Is Daimler having to engage with the utilities on behalf of fleet operators?
Part of my role oftentimes is facilitator of introduction to our customers. And that can vary widely, right? Because when you think of a fleet, there's a saying that goes, when you met one utility, you met one utility. And I think the same applies to a fleet customer. When you met one fleet, you've met one fleet. They're all a little different, but you can sort of bucket them into certain categories. And they're kind of on the extreme end of the spectrum in terms of engagement with utilities already. So let's say on one extreme end, you have like cold storage, food delivery folks that manage cold storage facilities. These are all your refrigerated tractors and trailers that you see at grocery stores. Or fleets like a Walmart or an Amazon, right? They own retail stores. In the case of Amazon, they've got data centers. These are folks that already work in the energy space. They kind of know, they at least have people that work in that space. They just need to talk to their fleet operators. I say just, but they already have people that know and speak the language of utilities. So it's a resource they can tap internally. On the opposite end of the spectrum, right? You've got fleets that all they do is pick up containers at a port, right? And they just do that every day, nonstop. And they park their tractors in a dirt lot, right? They could park, 40 to 50 of these tractors in a dirt lot, and that dirt lot may not even have power today. So those customers have zero interaction with the utility. They have the highest learning curve. So it varies widely, right? And part of what I do is, one, make them understand what utilities, how utilities operate, because you have your investor-owned utilities, you have your public municipal utilities, and then you have your co-ops. And those three types of utilities operate a little bit differently, even though each one of them is unique.
Jason, we mentioned the paper that you've just done here. Can you give us an overview of this paper just real quickly, please?
Yeah, absolutely. The paper's really broken up into two different sections. The first section really deals with what is generative AI and what are some of those use cases and the foundations of it used in the energy sector. And it's followed by the cybersecurity impact. So not only how attackers are using AI and generative AI to perform attacks on the energy sector, but also what we need to do as an industry if we're going to be using these tools to protect them and make sure that, hey, we can use them securely and that our data and the models themselves won't be leveraged against us.
I'm assuming that these are not problems that are just unique to the energy industry, but I mean, I think that there are maybe some aspects of it that are unique. Can you touch upon that a little bit?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different use cases for generative AI, specifically to the energy sector. We have very specific regulations that we have to follow. We have new laws that are coming out and have been introduced around the world. We use very specialized data. Not only do we use time series data that is generated within power plants or within the grid, we also are starting to use more data that is not time series. So it's unstructured or semi-structured data that are things like audio files or images or videos. So using those all together, we can really provide a lot of benefit and provide new solutions to the industry to tackle a lot of our specific problems that we're facing today.
Mark, from your perspective, I mean, looking at, certainly focusing on the energy industry, but then maybe looking at other industries as well. I mean, are you seeing some of these same things that are happening out there, or what's your perspective on that?
Absolutely. So generative AI, is still relatively new as it comes to scale, right? We've been working on it for a long time. And I think with the introduction of a software stacks and the higher performing GPU capabilities, it's become very mainstream over the last couple of years due to OpenAI and the work that they've done, and now lots of different models. The great thing about generative AI is it's able to take vast amounts of data and multimodal data, as Jason pointed out, right? So videos and noise and text and unstructured data and time series data, and basically look across these in a very efficient manner in order to provide insights into patterns and other things to help bring knowledge forward, right? This is very different than what was possible. In the past, you couldn't look at all of this data in a fast enough or enough of a real-time nature in order to see these patterns and be able to see anomalies that are coming and identify those anomalies and put a stop to something that might occur, right? And this is where it would tie into cybersecurity and things like that. But also, how do you pull knowledge from that data in a way that is interactive for users, in a way that calculators have been able to do for mathematicians, right? It allows them to do much more complex math much faster and more efficiently. And that's what AI and these tools are doing today. It's Google search, but as opposed to just coming back with data that you have to sift through, it's coming back with answers and patterns and the ability for really smart people to efficiently access knowledge and then put their expertise to work in solving these problems is going to change the way that the industry works.
So I'm intrigued by something you just mentioned, Steve, and I wonder if you can expand upon it a little bit. You said digital transformation. What do you mean by that?
If you take an existing plant that was designed in the 60s, maybe built in the 70s, a lot of the control systems were analog. Now, they work great. We lasted a long time, but it's really hard to get parts for the older systems. So there's a need to change out those systems and go to digital controls so that you can continue to update and keep the maintenance going and keep them operating. That's one aspect of it. The other aspect is looking at new technologies that help us do things faster and more efficient. Things like artificial intelligence, machine learning. Those are brand new technologies that a lot of different industries are deploying. Clear moves a little bit later and slower than a lot of industries, but we learn from those industries and then adopt those practices and bring them in when they're mature and ready.
I was just speaking with a colleague of yours at EPRI around using VR, virtual reality, especially in safety training. Is that part of this digital transformation?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we're revamping our training program as well, bringing in augmented reality, virtual reality. Well, they learn differently than they did when Kimberly went to university. And we have to adapt to that and meet people where they are.
There's a lot of excitement right now towards decarbonization goals and net zero goals for the next 10, 20, 30 years. And it's projected that in the next 25 years, we'll need 300 SMRs built to meet those goals. So, Kimberly, what is energy doing to realize that goal?
Well, one of the first things is getting out there and telling our story, and making sure folks know and understand what nuclear brings to the table. Our dispatchable 365 days a year, 24/7, day and night ability to produce clean power. And our history shows that, we're reliable, high capacity factors, and we can do the job. And so getting out there and telling our story, with all the great things that are happening is really important because the public perception, the momentum is growing. People want nuclear, but we're not fully there yet. So we have to get out there and tell our story. And then working with the teams, because to get this next wave of nuclear power plants going, it's a huge team effort. It's the utilities, with the developers, with the builders, with folks like EPRI, the Institute of Nuclear Power Operations, with the governments, and getting everybody, talking and on board and figuring out the structures of how we're going to do this. Because We need it. The demand is high. The demand is incredible, like it's never been before. And figuring out how to, get everybody together to do that is really the big hurdle.
So we've talked a lot about collaboration in the last couple of days, but not just collaboration, but the technologies that are going to be needed to meet this challenge head on. Engineer Ahmed, can you tell our listeners a bit about the types of technology that are being implemented in the Gulf region?
Well, the GCC countries are really marching ahead with the energy transition, and that entails huge changes to our systems, primarily the high penetration of renewables and new energy and clean energy in our system, which introduces new challenges to operating a system regarding stability, regarding the requirement for more flexibility to operate future power sources. That's why the future grid will require lots of new technology. In the past two forums, we focus on energy storage, which is one of the major technologies that we will need to be able to operate the grid. But that's not the only technology that we, of course, we will still continue to focus on energy storage. But there are more technologies that we need to explore to operate a much more complex system. One of these technologies that EPRI is exploring is the grid enhancement technologies, which will be something like, in my opinion, a must to make sure that our grids of the future can be utilized to its utmost capacities. Introduction of AI, demand side management, all of these would require research on how to develop them, how to integrate them in our systems and utilize them to be able to operate the future grid. The thing is that lots of these technologies are not developed enough to be applied now, but however, we need it tomorrow. So we need to work together. So my message is that we need to work together, but we need to work fast to be able to achieve our goals.
Thanks so much for taking a journey back through 2024 with me. I hope you enjoyed those segments. And of course, you can find all of these episodes for your listening pleasure at EPRI.com. And that's it for me. Make sure you continue to tune in through 2025 as we discuss items like virtual power plants, data centers, and sustainability.
If you like today's show, we invite you to subscribe to our podcast. And feel free to share the podcast with your colleagues and friends. For more information about EPRI, please visit our website at www.epri.com. And don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter at EPRI News. Together, we are shaping the future of energy.